I thought to begin my presentation, it might be helpful if I set the scene a little bit and explain who I am and where I work. So I'm dual qualified, I'm a speech and language therapist and a sensory integration practitioner, and I'm the clinical lead for the allied health professions in Phoenix Learning and Care, who I work for. Predominantly I work in their SEN college, so they have 2 campuses for students that are 16 to 25 years with special educational needs and disabilities. We have about, I think 96% of our student cohort are autistic. All of our students have speech, language and communication needs. The majority also have sensory processing differences and challenges. So we have an in-house therapy team. So in terms of therapeutic support, we have 2 speech and language therapists based, 1 at each college campus. We have a speech and language therapy assistant who works alongside me at our larger campus, and then we have counsellors available at both sites. And then we also have access to further psychological support and an associate occupational therapist if that's commissioned through members of our wider therapies team. And then, as Hannah would know, we're working alongside PBS UK to implement PBS into the college campuses with a view to then rolling that out more widely into our organisation. So we're currently doing that process and at the sort of beginning stage of implementing the PBS framework. So part of that involves embedding what we're calling Perma profiles that PBS UK have introduced to us, and that is based on the Perma model. So I'm just going to talk you through a little bit about the Perma model and then show you how we have adapted the Perma profiles to meet the communication needs of our students and to ensure that they're involved in that process. So the Perma model was developed by Martin Seligman. He's a leading researcher in the field of positive psychology. He's often referred to as the father of positive psychology. And Peterson describes that as the scientific study of what makes life most worth living. The Perma model is a model of happiness, and it's about flourishing and having good well-being. Feeling good. It identifies 5 key elements to achieving overall psychological well-being and happiness. And these elements are considered essential for all people to promote well-being and to achieve fulfillment in life and to feel good. So the Perma model, like I say, it's made up of these 5 elements, and I thought it would be useful just to spend a little bit of time exploring each of those elements and thinking about what they refer to. So we'll just sort of briefly go through those on this slide. So first we've got P for positive emotion. So Seligman's model of happiness proposes that focusing on positive emotion, on what makes us feel good by recognising our achievements, recording happy moments, and generally being positive and optimistic about the future is a key factor in an individual's overall happiness and well-being. And then we have engagement, so the second element. Everybody needs to feel fulfillment in their life by engaging in activities that are of interest to them, that nurture their interests and things that promote their well-being. So, you know, by engaging in activities and hobbies that help us to achieve a sense of flow. So this can be defined as contented immersion in an activity. So it's about the, you know, things that we can get lost in. You could spend hours doing these things. They, you know, they really give you a sense of fulfillment and engagement. The third element is positive relationships. So Seligman's model proposes that nurturing healthy and strong relationships with those around us is a significant contributing factor to our overall happiness and well-being. So, you know, we want to identify who is important, why they're important, what we like doing with those people. The fourth element is meaning. So having meaning and purpose in our daily life is really important. It's crucial for cultivating happiness and well-being. So focusing on creating meaning can have a really positive implications for helping people to become more motivated and fulfilled in their lives, to know what it is that helps them to feel fulfilled, what they're good at, what they thrive in. And the final element there is accomplishment or achievement. So, achievement has been shown to produce a positive response in our psychological well-being and our happiness. And this is no less true for individuals who require additional support because they are autistic or they have a learning disability or another additional need. So by nurturing environments in which supported individuals are able to achieve, whether that's small daily goals or broader life goals, long-term goals, by nurturing those, we can push these individuals to thrive and to flourish. And that brings meaning into their lives, and again, boosts self-esteem and well-being and overall psychological well-being and happiness. So that's just a very brief, quick overview of the Perma model. You can read more about Seligman's work on his theory of happiness. He has a book called Flourish, which is a really good read. So, if you want to find out more about that, you can have a look online or get a copy of that book. So when we're supporting individuals who may have a learning disability, maybe autistic, or have another additional need, their overall well-being and happiness should be an important factor in our work, as people are less likely to engage in behaviours of concern or meltdown when they're happy and in a stress-free or a reduced stress environment. We sometimes need to challenge ourselves to remember that having a diagnosis of any kind doesn't disqualify somebody from having good or poor mental health or the right to have good quality of life, for in terms of what that means for them as an individual. Whilst support systems do consider and plan how to react to behaviours which are considered challenging or of concern, the Perma model helps us, I think, to regard these behaviours as signs of distress and things that we can proactively prevent by anticipating their causes and increasing quality of life and well-being by working out, using the Perma model to think about what each of those elements means for that person. So it provides us with a model to really dig deep, to think about what quality of life is for that individual, because it will be different to the next person. And what we've wanted to achieve within our setting is being able to involve the student in that, which is why I'm presenting on how we've made that process accessible. So just to give it a little bit of context in terms of our setting, so we're embedding the Perma model through Perma profiles as part of our PBS practices, and we're establishing systems to develop and monitor and review these for each student. We have, I think off the top of my head, about 74 on roll across the two campuses. So for example, we'll do that through team around me meetings, EHCP reviews, key worker meetings, tutor and student meetings. But one of the key things for me as a speech and language therapist is supporting the students and the wider staff team to accommodate the speech, language and communication needs, so that students can be involved in this process in developing their Perma profiles. And so it's not something that's done to them, it's something that's done with them as far as possible. I completely appreciate that it may not be possible for some of our students to be as involved as others. But where we can make accommodations and support them to be able to be involved, then I think we need to make every effort to do that. So just a little bit about language for emotions and behaviours. In order to know what makes you feel good, what gives life purpose and meaning, and to set short or long-term goals, you need to have good receptive language, as in understand vocabulary, understand concepts, particularly the concepts that are related to the Perma model. And you need to have good interoceptive awareness. So interoception is our 8th sensory system. We know that autistic people often have interoceptive difficulties, with a tendency for being hypo-reactive to this sensory feedback. So that means they require a lot more sensory feedback for their brain to register that. which means it can take a lot longer for them to register those sensory experiences. And so that impacts on them being able to develop self-regulation strategies. Recent research has suggested that adequate interoceptive awareness and processing plays a role in higher level cognitive processes such as theory of mind, self-regulation, and it's also been argued recently that difficulties with self and other processing in autism might relate to underlying impairments with the interoceptive system. And so if we can't interpret our sensory experiences from inside our body and then link that to the language of emotions and then develop self-regulation strategies, it's going to be a lot harder to engage in this process if you don't know what things mean for you from a bodily level, from a sensory perspective, and then have the language. So just having conversations about what makes you feel good is going to be really tricky, and we need to think about how we can augment that and make it more visual. And on top of this understanding, a person's also got to be able to communicate their preferences and, you know, have the expressive language skills to be able to contribute and share their ideas in order to develop their PERMA profile. So making PERMA profiles accessible. Before we get started, as in making the PERMA profile, we need to think about how we prepare the student, you know, how we help them to understand this process, because PERMA profile was a new phrase to me. So, you know, it's not going to mean anything to them necessarily. So we need to give them that information. We need to help them understand, what does developing a PERMA profile mean? How is this going to apply to you? What is it going to mean for you in the long run? And we can do this by breaking down vocabulary and concepts. We can explore the meaning of words through focusing on their semantic and phonological information. So in that picture on the top right there, trying to help them to understand what PERMA is referring to. So giving them semantic information in terms of it means to feel good, to feel like we make a difference to other people. So it's giving them information about the meaning of that word, and what are we attributing to that meaning, and how do we share that with them in a very visual, accessible way. We've also found that this work integrates really nicely with the curriculum. So both PSHE, but also the Personal Growth Programme, PGP. So collaborating with teachers and, you know, enabling both of us to sort of reinforce the students' understanding of that language in the therapy session, but also in the classroom. So we've been able to reinforce that language, and we've been able to link it to other programs that we're using across the college. So for example, we use the zones of regulation and the interoception curriculum. So we've been able to try to, you know, boost and generalize the students' understanding of these phrases, which are, you know, going to become part of our college narrative, because we're implementing it as part of the PBS framework. So thinking about sharing information, like I've said, we want to make it accessible. We want to be able to support people's understanding, but also give them a way of expressing themselves. So in order to share information, we need to accommodate for those speech, language and communication needs. Some people may know what they want to say, but they can't necessarily find the words, or they can't put the words that they want into a sentence to communicate verbally. Other people might have social communication difficulties, which could include confidence with sharing information verbally. And others might have speech difficulties, which makes their expressive language difficult to understand. So, you know, for some of my students, it's something in every area of their speech, language and communication that makes it difficult for them to just have a verbal conversation and to just engage in this process verbally. And so we need to think about where their challenges are and how we can accommodate that. There's some prerequisites for students being able to use certain communication support tools. So I'd always advise you speak with a person's speech and language therapist if you want to explore their specific needs, or you're not quite sure about how to meet their needs. So an example would be that my students need to understand basic concepts like I like and I don't like. They need to understand symbols, which means that tools such as talking mats, which I use all the time in my practice, they may not be useful for some people with profound cognitive impairments, because they need to be able to understand that a symbol is representing an option at that point in time. So we need to know about this information, and if we don't know about it, but we want to make things accessible, then reaching out to the person's speech and language therapist, making a referral, talking to other people that know them really well will give you that further insight into how you might meet their needs. For my students who can contribute to their PERMA profiles, I've developed a range of accessible communication resources to facilitate this. So we'll just have a look at some pictures on the screen. So the first one there, we've just provided some visually presented open questions. Our brains are wired to take in information visually, but for people with speech, language and communication needs, having access to visual information accommodates things like auditory processing difficulties. So being able to take in verbal information and hold it and process it to be able to respond. It helps people understand vocabulary and concepts, because unlike verbal information, it's static, it's not going anywhere. We can keep a visual image or written text in front of someone for much longer than our verbal words are going to stay for. Another way of facilitating the conversation is by offering sentence starters with supporting prompts. So some of my students need support to get them started, to concentrate their train of thought, to put them on the right sort of path, if you like, of the topic in terms of the topic that we're talking about. They need to be cued into that. So in this picture, there's 3 prompts. So when I feel good, my face looks like, and they can fill out some answers in that top box, but there's also some examples for them. And then the same for when I feel good, my body feels like, and when I feel good, people will notice me. And so again, referring back to the slide before, these questions are tapping into that interoceptive awareness and that language for emotions, that you need to have that or be supported to access what you do know, in order to identify and contribute to what makes you have positive emotions and feel good. Some of my students respond well to having a predetermined sort of group of, well, in this case, blank bubbles to fill out. So seeing, you know, maybe it would just be 3 bubbles for one student, but for another student, there might be the amount of bubbles that there are on the picture here, because they can think of more answers related to the question. And so that works quite well because they know what's being expected of them. I can see that I've got to fill in an answer in this, you know, these 3 bubbles, these 6 bubbles. And also helps to guide the person that's working with them. They say a picture paints 1,000 words, and for some people, referring to photographs enables them to start a conversation. So it could cue them in, it could provide them with a way of initiating a conversation that they might otherwise struggle with to do that spontaneously, to just find the words, put them together and use them in their verbal speech. And also, I think this has been quite useful because we're talking about topics that aren't necessarily spoken about that frequently with our students. And so that our students aren't necessarily well versed in talking about these things because it's not something that comes up all the time. So using the photographs has been really helpful in terms of then, you know, reviewing that together and then being able to start a conversation and share spontaneous information based on that photograph, giving them that starting point that they needed. And then we've also used rating scales. So in this example, when we were exploring the 4th element, which is meaning, we use this rating scale to explore different types of activities and basically how important they might be to a person. Okay, sharing information. I couldn't do a presentation without talking about talking mats, because I use them I feel like I use them every day, but I definitely use them every week because they're so incredibly versatile. So it was a no-brainer for me that they were going to be incorporated into developing our perma profiles accessible to our students. So for those of you that aren't familiar with talking mats, they're a thinking tool. They enable a thinker to place pictures underneath a visual scale to share their opinions, their preferences, their wishes, their choices and opinions with a listener. They're a great resource because not only do they lower the cognitive and communication demand that we so often put on people, but they use verbal, visual and tactile clues, which together provides a great stimulus than any of them on their own would do. So the whole process is multisensory because it provides that link between the verbal, the visual and the tactile. So these images that you can see on the slide are some of the talking mats that I did with one of my students, where I was the listener and they were the thinker. They shared all sorts of wonderfully rich information with me that they wanted to include in their perma profile. These pictures are from when we were completing the third element for relationships. And we were exploring why their family were important to them, what they like to do with the important people in their life, which also included people from college. And we found out really important information through that mat, which I believe we would not have otherwise found out, that they would not have otherwise communicated that to us. And it's important information for their perma profile, which at its very core is rooted in making people feel good. So, for example, they told us previously in another talking mat that we did as part of the positive emotions section about free time, they told us in that that they loved swimming. However, when we got to this set of talking mats, these mats allowed it to become clearer that they only love swimming when they're with other people, specifically family or a trusted staff member from college. They do not enjoy going alone. Because they could go alone, but they don't enjoy going alone. And they also prefer, if they have a preference, the sea to the swimming pool. And so that mat provided a catalyst, if you like, for conversation to explore these preferences further, that we wouldn't necessarily have had those conversations. Or if they just said, yeah, I like swimming. Okay, they like swimming, let's put that down. But actually what we didn't know is that nuanced information that, yeah, they like swimming, but if you said to them, okay, you're going to go swimming, yeah, I'll see you later, which they arguably could work towards, they wouldn't enjoy that as much. So it really gave us a lot of rich information, very, individual centered information. So by the time we reach A for achievement, we're thinking about pulling together all the information that we've got to try to develop short and long-term goals. Being a modern day speech and language therapist, goal setting with the people that I work with is really important to me. It's absolutely no use if it's all on my agenda. There's no value to that. It has to be in collaboration. It has to be led by the person that I'm working with as far as possible. So for me, developing a perma profile is no different. So we use the talking mats to elicit information related to their goals, things that they might like to aspire to achieve. For example, what would I like to do and ways I help other people? So that they're the two talking mats on the screen. They're the topics that we explored in those talking mats. As you can see, the mats generated spontaneous information, which you can see in the post-it notes in the pictures. So always good to have a bank of post-it notes available. And the person shared key information, which we then took that information from the talking mat and they rated that information on another accessible communication resource in terms of like most to least important to them, so that we could then narrow down and identify what their goals would be. And then we were able to write that up. And one of the examples is on the right hand side of the slide there. So that's one of the goals that they wanted to work towards. So adaptations for remote learning. Everybody is currently in a lockdown. Most people watching this, if you're not supporting a child that's learning remotely, you're probably having to adapt and facilitate remote learning through your own practice potentially. So obviously we've found ourselves in that position, and we've had to think about how we adapt our resources to allow for students to still continue to contribute to and develop their perma profiles, but doing so remotely. And for some of our learners, they can do that. They're really adept at using the PC. They can understand and develop their perma profile remotely. So they might be doing this with our support in speech and language sessions, or they might be doing it with their teachers' support in tutorials or group sessions. But for some, they are choosing to do it in their own time, especially if they're struggling to engage in the live remote sessions. So to facilitate this, I developed a PowerPoint which has different types of activities in it that then facilitates their engagement. So on the screen at the minute, there is a sorting task, which is very similar to a talking mat. So they've got an explanation in one slide, which is the top bit of that photo that explains to them what they need to do. And then on the next slide, they've got the pictures that they then can sort under that, those options of I enjoy, not sure, or I don't enjoy. And again, we can tweak this to the student. So if I feel like they could only cope with 2 visual options, like I enjoy and I don't enjoy, then I can remove the not sure option. So it can still be centered to their individual communication needs. We've also provided some sort of visual closed questions, so they can go through the options and they can move the green circle around either the yes or the no. For some students, it might be more of a true or a false, but it depends on whether they can understand those concepts. Again, we've got blank slides for photographs, and we've incorporated those sentence starters and the rating scales into the PowerPoint as well. So there's a variety of different strategies for each element, so that hopefully we're able to elicit some information, because one or two of those activities has helped to facilitate their thinking and their contribution to their perma profiles. And from these examples, I think it's safe to say that the students are enjoying personalising their electronic perma profiles. So I've given them a standard template, and then they've decided to change the background of the PowerPoint slides or add in photos and use the little design function in PowerPoint to put them into blocks. And then they've emailed that back to us, or they've shared it on our Teams chat, and there's checking in to say, like, does this look okay? This is what I've done so far, and can you give me the next bit of work, and things like that. So they've been really engaged with it. We've also linked with our staff and parents for feedback. Again, super important that we do this. So we have a questionnaire that we share with parents, carers and teachers, or our support workers. And for some students with more complex cognitive and communication difficulties, we will have to rely on this way of gathering the information more so than the students' involvement. However, where we can get their involvement, we want to facilitate that. But we appreciate that the majority of the information may need to come from other people that know them well. However, for this student, we were able to go through the staff feedback together in a session, and we explored whether they agreed with the staff ideas and the feedback, or whether they would disagree with it, which is absolutely okay if they did. And as it happens, they agreed pretty much everything the staff had said is what the student had said to me in a separate sessions. And so we were able to then bring all this information together, again, in a bit more of an accessible format, that then this can be embedded into their overall perma profile. And so what we've ended up with is an accessible perma profile. So we've done a contents page, and we've tried to reflect that the language of, it's about the individual. It's about, this is what I have said to you makes me feel good, not what Kate, my speech and language therapist, has said. So we've tried to reflect that in the language that, according to me and the college team, what does positive emotion look like for me? And so it's still very individual person centered. So we have that contents page, and then their accessible profile looks a little bit like this. So this is just a short video of the first element for positive emotion. And so what we've got in there is the accessible information on the first page that we shared initially to help them to understand what positive emotion meant. We've then got the information from the student and the staff that we've brought together into that accessible template. Then we've got the visual open question sheet that this student was able to answer. And then we've got some examples of 2 talking mats that they did that has a wealth of information in there, all of which is captured succinctly in that second page where we brought the staff and the student feedback together. And so this is just the positive emotion element, but they would have the same layout with these first 2 pages or first 3 pages, sorry, for every single element. And then there may be talking mats in there, there might be rating scales, but whatever's in there is all the accessible stuff we've done with the student. And then if we need to condense that down so that the staff have a slightly shorter version, then we can always just take the pages where we've brought all the information together and provide them with a brief document. So I can move on to the next slide. I thought I'd end with sharing some ways in which I feel PERMA has been particularly powerful within my setting. And I want to do that by sharing a case study with you. So I've called it case study A, didn't want to use the person's name, but they are 20 years old. They've experienced significant childhood trauma, which has resulted in what's been described as moderate levels of psychological distress. They experienced care from the age of 8, which subsequently led to them being detained in hospital under Section 3 of the Mental Health Act, and experiencing numerous placements, some of which were out of county, very far away from home as well, and all of which broke down due to repeated incidents where other people were injured and I think in some cases hospitalised. So the common theme is that this person would verbally communicate their wishes to be near their family, to live with their family, which would coincide with an increase in the frequency and intensity of behaviours. Within our setting, following an incident, we reviewed the package of support alongside social care and CAMS, and the person is currently on a reduced timetable, living within their family home with regular support from social care, and we've not experienced any behaviours of concern or had an incident since last September. So I met with this person weekly during the second half of the autumn term before Christmas. We use lots of talking mats to facilitate our conversation and to give them thinking space because they benefit from this. Even though they can verbally share information and their wishes, they still really benefit from that space to just think and process a visual rather than being asked question after question. And working together to develop this person's PERMA profile, for me, it's been a really powerful experience as a practitioner. I guess you could say that it's increased my own work PERMA. And I would, when I was thinking about this for the presentation, I think I would attribute it to a few reasons. So firstly, I think as a rapport building activity together, it's really helped to facilitate our therapeutic relationship. It's connected everyone together. To use a metaphor, it was as if the individual was in the driving seat for the first time in their life, developing their PERMA profile, with the rest of us in the passenger seats, just facilitating that, giving the odd direction maybe, because it's about their PERMA, not mine, not the social workers, not the services. And then thirdly, this was the first time that they'd ever been supported to explore what difference they make in the world and who they make a difference to. And even though I've said this several times over the last 6 months, even now saying it, it just gives me so much like warm and fuzzy feeling inside, because, and I was only having a conversation yesterday with our Senko that as I was preparing their profile, because I'm going to share it with them on Friday with the final version, I was typing some stuff up, and I said to the Senko and our SALT assistant, when do we ever say to somebody, what difference do you make in the world? Like, people don't ask me that. So like, why would we ask the people that we support? So I think since doing this work together, this person absolutely loves cooking, loves baking. They do that regularly in their college timetable because it helps them feel good. So therefore ups their PERMA. So they enjoy doing this, and they really like bringing around the goods that they've made and sharing them with people. And so we've sort of got this narrative together now that I'm absolutely keen on keeping, building into a habit, that they bring things up to the therapy hub and they offer us something that they've made. And I will make a point of saying to them, thank you for making a difference to my day, because it makes a difference to my day. And we just have this little thing now. They'll look at me and sometimes they'll giggle. Sometimes they've walked away and they've said, that's PERMA, that is. And so it's like, it's part of our narrative. So I spoke to this person last week because it felt right to give them the last say in my presentation. And I asked them 3 questions. So I said to them, what difference do you think your PERMA profile will make to how college support you? And they said, it might help me a bit more. They might understand me more and what I do when I'm struggling. I asked them, what was it like for you creating your PERMA profile? And they said, fun, in quite a high-pitched voice. And then I said, what difference has the PERMA profile made to you? And they said, it's been helpful. I matter. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope it's been useful for you.